Bizarre Brain Comics. Yes, hello again. I am your horror host, the Dark Librarian, here once again to tell tales of terror. A toast to blood. Yes. I am the Dark Librarian, is here again for Bizarre Brain Comics. And we are keeping with our October Halloween theme tonight. We will talk about, not this one, the one that fell on the floor, the occult tales of Dr. Specter. Or correction, the occult files of Dr. Specter from Gold Key Comics. We'll be talking about number 15. From 1975, written by Don Glut and drawn by Jesse Santos. Now, these two creators worked together for several years for Gold Key Comics. The writer, Don Glut, created the character of Dr. Specter. He is a horror host, but he is also, like Vampirella before him, the main character of the main story. Don Glut did some writing for the Warren horror comics from earlier in the 60s and late 60s and early 70s. And then started doing some work for Gold Key Comics. And he, as I said, created the Dr. Specter character and also several other characters. From the Tales of Sword and Sorcery, Dagar the Invincible. And prior to that, he did not have his own title, but is featured in this Dr. Specter story is Durock the Barbarian. And he also created Trag and the Sky Gods. And in the course of his stories, Don Glut was trying to create a shared universe, which Gold Key was not interested in. But he liked that concept that Marvel and DC had. And as a result, other characters that he had created, he brought into other stories. He really liked the concept because of going back to the Universal monsters of the 30s and 40s, and they had a shared universe, and he liked those characters, and he brought them as much as he could into his own writings without breaking copyright laws. For example, tonight's tale has the Frankenstein monster, but of course it cannot be the Universal version of the Frankenstein monster, and he always liked Dracula and other vampire tales, so he has a Dracula-like character in the form of Baron Tibor, and in at least one story, he actually brought Dracula into it, but of course it's not the Universal version of Dracula. Same thing, they have a mummy character, and he not in this story, but in the course of Dr. Specter's run, had an original mummy character, again not the Universal version. And the same goes for the Wolfman, or a werewolf. Werewolves are are ubiquitous. They're legendary, so anyone can use them. But they cannot call him the Wolfman, because that is a universal character. And in the course of his run, Dr. Specter himself was turned into a werewolf, and in a secondary storyline which ran for several issues. Again, Gold Key did not like these continuing storylines. They wanted it nice and sweet, wrap up in one issue. So he would have a theme or a character, something that would carry over for 2 or more issues, but each plot was wrapped up in the one issue. And some of the as backup, and also in the mystery comics digest that featured some Dr. Specter hosted stories. Don Bluth had characters that then appeared sometimes later in his own title and his own storyline, such as there's a Were-Lion Man, which appears later. Baron Tibor himself appeared in an earlier story predating the Dr. Specter title. And later, although I've not seen it, I've heard of it. He even brought in the Gold Key superhero characters into some stories to round out their universality, because they didn't cross these things over normally. Such as thinking of Man of the Atom. I would like to see that, but I've never found that. So let's get into it. Dr. Specter. The Occult Files of Dr. Specter. The Occult Files of Dr. Specter. I said number 15 from 1975, drawn by Jesse Santos. Written by Don Glut. Here, at first, let's see a few other issues. And as was normal for the Dr. Specter, as for Gold Key titles, it had a full painted cover. And earlier on, they were painted. It looks like George Wilson. There's no credit for it, but I believe this is probably George Wilson's work. And then later, see here, Jesse Santos himself did the paintings, and he did the same on the other Don Glut written titles. Yes, these 2 issues here actually go together, because here we see Jesse Santos, Dr. Specter. Here's Baron Tibor, and this Baron Tibor. He was a vampire character. He was started out as a villainous character, but was sympathetic. He did not want to be a vampire, and became a friend of Dr. Specter, who created a serum that would relieve him of his bloodlust and also his vampire powers. And then this brain here, the brain of Zorkon, who was a villain, a sorcerer from an unknown prehistoric age, about 13,000 years in the past, much like Robert E. Howard's Hyborian age. And there was a barbarian hero who, in previous stories that were in Gold Key mystery titles, written by Don Glut and drawn by Jesse Santos, in which Durock destroyed the sorcerer. But we'll find out in later how he managed to survive in the form of a brain. And he he took mental control of Baron Tibor, had him try to destroy Dr. Specter, and because the sorcerer is works for the dark gods, and Durock was an emissary of, or working for, unknowingly, the warrior gods, who opposed the dark gods. So he survived and wanted to get his brain transplanted into the immortal body of Baron Tibor. It appears that the brain, at the end of the story, the brain was destroyed, and Baron Tibor himself was destroyed while fighting off his own vampiric bloodlust. Then we come to this one, number 14, and here is Durock himself versus the Frankenstein monster. Okay, here we see it at the beginning. Lovely splash page by Jesse Santos. He passed away in the 1990s. He is a Philippine-born artist. I really like his work. He had an unusual style, and I think the only thing of his that he drew, I mean, everything that I've seen of his art was written by Don Glut. I don't think I've ever seen him draw from anyone else's writing. And here's a thunderstorm, thunder and lightning storm, and this flash of lightning, and a sword suddenly appears, falling from the sky. What's going on? And here he is with his assistant slash love interest, Rainflower, Lakota Rainflower, an Indian lass, American Indian lass of mixed tribe. Dr. Specter goes out and inspects that, sees what's going, doesn't know where the sword had come from. Then they're suddenly called away. There's something is found at a construction site, and it seems to be a mud encased giant human figure. Then suddenly lightning strikes through the tent which is housing it, and it comes to life, and it is revealed that it is the Frankenstein monster, which had been an opponent of Dr. Specter in one or more previous issues, I can't remember. And he goes on a rampage. He just wants to be left alone, but he has anger issues. And so do the people, because they see him and they rather go after him. Now, Jesse Santos' art is good panel-to-panel storytelling, relatively dynamic, not overly dramatic sometimes. Sometimes some other dramatic choices might have worked better, I think. But who's to say? So here we are. The monster is off in the woods, and they're back at the Specter Manor, examining the sword, when suddenly he's compelled to do something. He raises the sword, and another flash of lightning, and here is Durock, somehow amazingly able to speak English from 12,000 or so years in the past. And he tells, meanwhile, the brain and his mute slave, it has become aware. So they're trying to get the story from Durock and explain what's going on here. Durock says he had touched a gemstone, attached it to his sword, and suddenly lightning struck, and here he was. So the warrior gods had transported him to the present to combat the evil sorcerer, but he doesn't know that yet. So they're going around. The sword is acting as a divining rod, telling them where to go. And meanwhile, here the creature is fine. He's in the woods. He's actually finding some peace. Notice this is a version. This is not the universal version of the monster. This is more as he was described in Mary Shelley's book. And he's finding peace when suddenly his peace is disrupted by the the giant muscular mental slave of the brain come to get the monster. Wielding the brain, he puts the monster under his mental control, just as he had this guy, and we discover that it is the brain's intent to have it to be implanted into the immortal and powerful body of the Frankenstein monster. But they have to go someplace. They go here, and they need to use a boat. And they just clean out all these sailors, so they can take the boat. And they're off, and shortly Dr. Specter is right. Now here's a bit of storytelling of all these narrow panels. It works effectively to show you what's going on and the location. And here are the sailors again. They're thinking they're going to clean their clock as kind of a revenge against these others because they think they're together. Well, they're not together, and Durock, wielding his now charmed sword, kind of cows them, and they tell them what just happened, and they loan them just a little rowboat because there are no more power boats available. Now again, here you see, here we go, seeing the fading of the figure, and you don't really know, and it's the mental slave bowing to the brain, and they get to the island. Dr. Specter and company finally get to the island, and we find out here they're racing to get. They need to stop the brain. They know it's the brain of Zorkon. Durock, in his previous life, had, as I said before, had defeated thought he had destroyed the sorcerer, but by throwing him into the sea to drown, which he did. But while his body died, his mind survived, and with the power of the dark gods, had preserved his brain for all these millennia, and had formed a crystal globe around it, which in the previous story, in this story here, had been shattered by Dr. Specter, but the brain had survived, and this mental slave here had absconded with the brain, and had formed a new protective globe around the brain. So now they're going through these caves. They have to split up, and suddenly they're being onslaught by what they initially think or some horrible enemies, but it's just illusions, and they figure out it's an illusion. Same thing for Durock. He takes another pathway, and it takes him directly to the brain. And then Durock must battle Zorkon's slave. While in the process they're fighting, they get back out onto the surface, into the storm, and Zorkon exerts his will on Durock, in which forces him to drop his blade. He can't recover it. He's overcome, and just as the slave is about to destroy Durock, he is struck by lightning. Now, I personally think this scene could have been, I mean, it's well drawn. I think it could have been done more dramatically, but that's just me. And which destroys the man, and Durock is relieved. Now, I want to show you here. He has good use of anatomy, good panel-to-panel continuity. It's very, very nicely drawn, but he has an unusual style which I find appealing, but I think would not have endeared him to either Marvel or DC. But works well for this kind of stuff. It's almost kind of a scribbly style with his inking. But when he draws the lovely ladies, his line work is generally smoother and less erratic. And here's our other two protagonists still in the caverns, using their torches, and they find the brain, but the brain is being protected now by the Frankenstein monster, who is afraid of fire, but the mental powers of Zorkon overpower that kind of fear. And he's in the midst of a combat with Dr. Specter. Lakota intervenes, but in the process, Dr. Specter speaks to the monster and is able to help him overcome the influence of the brain. He grabs the brain because he realizes he is the victim of this brain, and he's tired of being used. He takes the brain, goes up, and to destroy it, tosses it into the sea, from whence it had originally been, which releases everyone from the brain. Of course, this leaves it open for Zorkon to reappear at a later time. I don't know if he ever does or not. But then the monster hates Dr. Specter. They are our enemies. And he's wanting to destroy Dr. Specter. He throws these whole boulders down at them. And the Lakota gets Durock's sword, hands it to him, and he tosses the sword where it lands right next to the monster. And as a result, it is struck by lightning. Again, the power of the warrior gods, causing a landslide which utterly buries the monster and hopefully destroying it. But, things happen. He'll come back, or has the possibility to come back. Durock is fine. He's recovered from his experience, gathers up his sword again, which is again struck by lightning, and he is transported back to his own time, leaving Lakota and Dr. Specter by themselves. Now, earlier on, they had the backup stories, individual horror stories. There's, if you can call anything Gold Key did as horror. For example, here's one that is drawn by Dan Spiegel. These were in the back of these of the issues, because Gold Key really wanted Dr. Specter, to just be a horror host. Don Glut wanted more, but to tell better stories, he wanted to tell longer stories, so they eventually just dropped the backup stories. Although his stuff still appeared occasionally in the Comics Digest, Mystery Comics Digest. But so it allowed Don Glut to write a little better, more quality stories, that he didn't have to be rushed quite as much. And this ran until I think it was 83. It was like a quarterly title, and this is what I think is intended to was the last issue printed. Of course, this one was Whitman, which was a Gold Key imprint for multi-pack, and this cover drawing is based on the original cover painting for an early Dr. Specter issue. Yeah, this is the original painting, but this cost more to reproduce, so they had it redrawn in line as a line drawing and reprinted. Now this is reprinting an earlier issue. I think of the first issue, and from what I understand, there was another Dr. Specter in another story in another title after this. But so at the end, it was like so many other Gold Key and also Charlton Comics there at the end was just reprint stuff. This is the earlier story featuring the monster of Frankenstein. I like that cover. I really like that cover. Well, but gotta love the Jesse Santos cover paintings. I'll talk more about Jesse Santos at another time when I do something else that Don Glut had written. And that's all I'm going to cover on this for right now. I hope you enjoyed it. I really liked Dr. Specter when I was a kid, even though I only got an occasional issue myself. But it's worth a read. The Dark Horse Archives have reprinted hardbound reprint editions. I have 2. I think there were 3, if not 4 of them. And well worth getting your hands on if you can and reading. I really, really enjoy them. Because it's both horror host and main character. Heroic character. Okay, that's all I've got. I hope you enjoyed it. Like if you did, share it with your other comic book friends or others who just like horror things or Frankenstein monsters, vampire, all that stuff. And like and share, subscribe. And remember, comics are art.